Doomsday Clock promises to be one of the biggest events of DC Rebirth, and it continues with an origin story we've been waiting for. What's up, everybody? I'm Stan, and welcome to Detail Comics, where we go over comics in detail. This is an I Review, the show where I go over a comic book, its story, its art, give you my impressions and let you know whether it's something you should go back to the comic book shop for or not. Make sure you subscribe to get more of these every single week. Doomsday Clock from Geoff Johns and Gary Frank has been one of the biggest things, one of the most anticipated pieces of DC Rebirth history and lore that's coming out, and even though it's been transitioning to a once every 2 month schedule, it's still something that we're really anticipating, and it's going to play a big role in the future of DC Comics, or at least that's what we think for now. In this one, we're going to get a secret origin story, but let's dive in and see exactly what we get for information and how it alludes to what's going to happen next. Doomsday Clock is probably one of the most highly anticipated and overly scrutinized comic books coming out currently. While DC's Dark Knight's Metal dives into continuity, Doomsday Clock is taking something like The Watchmen, which is considered a seminal work outside of the main DC continuity, and thrusting it into a world of superheroes versus the superhero deconstruction that it was originally intended to be. And Doomsday Clock number 4 doesn't really give us much of that, because what we're dealing with is actually the origin story of Reggie. When we first got the indication that this Rorschach wasn't the same one that we knew from the original series, and in issue number 2, when we got the first name Reggie introduced to these things, we got a few more clues regarding the history of this version of Rorschach. When we open up into the story, we actually see him in line, waiting amongst these other people at Arkham Asylum, trying to get his food. In his own mind, he sees pancakes, but in reality, the plate doesn't have anything nearly like that, while he's being accosted by the Tiger Man next to him, basically making a proposition similar to, "Be my prison bitch and I'll keep you protected." At which point in time, we immediately bounce back to the younger version of Reggie Long, where he's laying on the carpet of the family living room as they're watching the first detonation of the atomic bomb inside Vietnam. So when we're talking about sending Dr. Manhattan into that conflict that was so present inside Watchmen, when they kind of grew up, when he left his original apartment inside New York City, when they moved to someplace else. As we jump back into the actual Arkham Asylum, we see Victor freeze in the background, but the most important thing is that he's spitting out pieces of tiger flesh that he's taken a bite out of. This is just as violent and visceral kind of person as the original Rorschach, as Walter Kovacs. And this is going to be the key factor for the entirety of the Doomsday Clock number 4. We're jumping back and forth between the original Watchmen universe and what's currently happening. The shift in time is going to be the big thing. As his roommate is necking with his girlfriend, he sees his father on the television set saying that he was going to be interviewing Walter Kovacs. You jump back into Arkham Asylum as you see the very close-up illustrations from Gary Frank of the mosquito going into the bug zapper outside of Killer Croc's cell inside Arkham. You have these very distinct moments in time as what is happening is defining Reggie and his perspective as things are moving forward. As we finally get into, like page number 6, that's when we actually see the explosion. Veidt's monster comes and creates this psychic wave that is going to devastate millions of people inside New York, causing suicides and deaths all over the place. The mirroring of these images between then and now, how Reggie's sitting inside Arkham waiting for the psychologist, how he was sitting frozen inside of his car, how he sees things that aren't necessarily there, the impression, the actual psychic break that was caused by this entire chaos, this mass hysteria that was forced on the people by Adrian Veidt, by Ozymandias. He was broken out of his car. He was taken by the paramedics. But when Dr. Mason sits down in front of him, he's got this giant eye inside of his forehead. There's a clear dichotomy between these two times. However, there are similarities to what he's doing. We jump back into his stay while he's in his psychic ward as he makes a break for it. He escapes. He makes his way up onto the roof, ready to jump, so that way he can get rid of any kind of visions that are inside of his brain, any of this psychosis that's been caused by this massive psychic illusion that was thrust upon the people. And who does he find up there? He finds Mothman. So Byron is standing there, and it seems like he's another person that's out there to be suicidal, and the conversation that they have seems to allude to the fact that Byron sees what he wants to see. He has forced himself into a delusional state, and he's just like, "No, I'm not crazy. I'm not here to jump off. I can fly." And you think that at that point in time, it's Reggie having a vision of a man heading out into the world and then ultimately lying on the ground below. But no, Byron really can fly as he sets off into the moonlight, naked as a jaybird, just looking for some good diner food. What it comes down to is that as we go through these things, we see the evolution of Reggie Long as he becomes, this oddly psychotic individual, and then ultimately how he creates control over his visions. While he might continue to see these things inside, what he forces himself to see, what he takes mental control over, that is going to be the key. He's continually accosted by other people, the orderlies, various other inmates, and we get the different tales as things go through. We've got, more cameos from Mr. Freeze. We've got Jane Doe, which we all know to be Saturn Girl, as he's kind of moving through these things, moving through time. He's talking about the evolution of the Watchmen, how Byron is telling the story of the original Minutemen, as he's reading Kovacs's journal, as he's looking at his dad's coffee mug. He's taking into account the history. There's a piece of the puzzle that he's not necessarily getting, and it happens to be Veidt's face. There's a lot of very overt visuals that give you clues as to how this story is going to be going that he's just not picking up on. So it's a relationship between Gary Frank as the artist, between Geoff Johns as the writer, and what we know of the story historically, what we know of the story and how it's going to be moving forward. Finally, Reggie's looking to fight back, and Byron trains him, basically turns him into a one-man militia, one-man Minuteman group, so that way he can take on the people that are causing him harm. And he's treating the Kovacs diary, what he's taken from Walter Kovacs, the studies from his father, and turning them into, well, almost like a Bible, a guidebook, the way that makes sense of the world that is going to impact him and his mentality moving forward. Continuous violent outbursts, continually whooping on pretty much everybody. And then finally, after years of being in here, years of training, years of becoming better, the last shoe drops and it's revealed that Ozymandias was behind the entire monster attack in New York City that caused so many lives that day. And that's when the final piece of the puzzle drops in for Reggie Long. That's when he finally makes the transition to Rorschach. That's when he decides that it is time to escape. He lights a match, throws it into the laundry, smashes the fire alarm, and then we see the building going up in a blaze of glory. However, Mothman, true to the essence of Mothman, is just like, it's so bright, man. It's calling to me. It has been calling to me, so it's time for me to go home. As he unveils his wings and then walks directly into the fire. Doesn't run, doesn't jump, doesn't have any kind of reservations about it. He just literally walks into the fire. Of course, he doesn't leave without giving Reggie a parting gift. Between the apple, a bottle of water, and a letter that's going to detail the histories and what his potentials are, he's got a ticket on the Percy Bysshe, and he's got the Rorschach mask. He's holding on to these things, and he's making himself into a brand new person, brand new character with the help of Byron. Byron's looking to help Reggie move forward, whether it's healthy for him or not. As we break through the ice and we find ourselves in the Antarctic as he's making his way across this frozen wasteland to the facility of Ozymandias, where we saw the final showdown of Dr. Manhattan, Ozymandias. Rorschach was eviscerated outside of the facility. It was the final culminating point of the entire event of Watchmen. And as Rorschach makes his way into the facility, he sees Ozymandias alone, staring at the tumor that is currently residing inside his skull, the glioblastoma on his frontal lobe. And he's just like, yeah, if you're going to kill me, make it quick, man. It's going to be better than whatever's going to happen to me. However, Reggie sees in the eyes of Adrian Veidt regret. He sees a look of remorse, of pain, that what he was trying to do to instill peace, to bring peace to the rest of the world, is something that he failed at because he went about it the wrong way. And that's when we jump back into the current day, which is actually in the future of the DC Universe. And there's one person that has been living inside of the head of Rorschach. This has probably been Jane Doe. It's been Saturn Girl seeing all the past events and watching them unfold so that way she has a better understanding of who this person is and who she could possibly partner with. As she releases him from the confines of his cell, we get a lot more backstory. We see the first partnership of Ozymandias and the new Rorschach, and we see Arkham Asylum light up as people are escaping, and the monitor in the Batcave is showing this exact same thing, where we also see Dr. Mason's mask. Batman was the person that was infiltrating, the person that was asking these questions. People were escaping, and then the mosquito is back and flying into the blue lights, only to be eviscerated. And that's where the main story ends. And what Watchmen has been doing since it was originally written by Alan Moore, and what Geoff Johns and Gary Frank are trying to do with Doomsday Clock currently, is that they're adding in context after the fact. So we have a lot of different things. We have all these letters and notes from Fitzgerald Mental Hospital where he's writing to his sister and telling her of the evolution of his story, of Byron going through these various things, and then finally the obituary that came out of issue number 1, one of those pieces, one of those clippings that was all trying to make sense of what's going to be coming up in the story, finally comes to pass when we see the death of Byron, the death of Mothman. And a lot of people might argue, they might say that this isn't a necessary piece of the Doomsday Clock puzzle. It was a relatively unnecessary origin story, and what I think is that it gives you a lot of understanding when it comes to how Saturn Girl picks up on the history of Rorschach, starts to understand him, how Batman is trying to understand Rorschach, how there are things outside of the DC continuity that people have no control or concept of, and that we're getting that information the same time that members of the DCU are getting that information, which is a huge impact on these things. There are these outside foreign bodies, Ozymandias, Rorschach, Marionette, the Mime, they're all moving into this world, and they have no context of what's going on here, and we have no understanding of what they're capable of based on the universe that they're coming from. And that's the same that could be said for Dr. Manhattan, and what can be said for the comedian. The manipulation of the very fabric of reality is what is occurring inside this story. So there's a lot of fine details that you need to pay attention to, and while this might not necessarily be a mandatory piece of reading, it is still something that you can find very interesting and compelling. The story of Reggie Long and his turn into Rorschach is one of personal perseverance and a very fractured mentality, and I like the execution, especially the duality between the previous Watchmen universe and our current universe. So I'm excited for where Doomsday Clock is going, but I want to know what your opinions are, so hit me up in the comments down below so we can start that conversation. As always, if you like what you see, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to get more news, reviews, and commentary on comic books, comic book movies, comic book TV shows and games, and anything and everything inside the world of comics.